further ado, I want to say welcome to Bob Fletcher. I want to say welcome to my father, who is live on the air tonight. And I want to say welcome as well to Big Mike, who is live on the air tonight as well. And I told Bob before we got on the air that my father and Big Mike may be joining us. I want to say welcome to Caleb Schaefer. He's live on the air. Of course, he's the one that just came over here a couple minutes ago and told me we had some background music. I hope that wasn't too annoying. I think we got that taken care of now. So welcome, Caleb. Welcome, Dad. Welcome, Big Mike. We will get you guys going here in a few moments as Brother Bob leads us off, and then hour number 2, we're going to do some questions, and maybe those are the moments we'll get you guys involved. Depending on how this goes, I'd like to just have a roundtable discussion tonight. Brother Bob seems like an extremely informative man. I just talked to him for the first time here about 15 minutes ago, and I'm excited to have him. Again, I've heard him on the Hagman and Hagman Report with Steve Quayle, who I really appreciate Steve Quayle so very much. And without further ado, as I said, Brother Bob, it's very nice to have you here tonight on the air with us. And how are you doing this evening, my friend?
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to be here. Over here, fortunately, it's a little bit earlier than it is where you are broadcasting from, and that's a big deal to me because I'm just plain old-fashioned, getting old. And the later the show is, the slower I am, I'm afraid. So I've been chasing corruption in government for over 30 years. I was not politically oriented originally, not inclined to be involved with anything like that. And to make it very briefly, I do want to give folks a general idea of who I am and how I actually got involved with doing the investigations that I ended up doing and have continued doing for so long. Basically, I've been in several businesses of my own in the past. To quote the Hagman and Hagman show the other evening a while back, Steve Quayle was on and introduced myself and introduced me, calling me kind of an entrepreneur or a man of many talents, because he and I go back 20 years as far as knowing each other, and the bottom line is I have done many things in my lifetime, and leading into how I got involved with being involved with chasing corruption in the United States government, which I have done now for some 25 to 30 years. In 1985, and I got to try to keep this really short because otherwise it's an amazing, interesting story. However, it gets to be where it eats up so much time, it'll pull away from what we really want to talk about tonight. In 85, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had a successful toy manufacturing company. We manufactured several small novelty toys for children, hand puppets and things of that sort. And we were doing rather well, and I even had a couple of retail operations inside amusement parks around the country. And we were doing very well, and I was, like a good businessman, I was always looking to expand, and I had an opportunity presented to myself to merge with a company in Atlanta, Georgia, that was a national company, or it presented itself to be a international company, and he was interested in merging with my company and expanding and actually going on television with one of the toys that we manufactured. It would have been an excellent toy for television sales, and we would have made millions and millions of dollars if, in fact, it had turned out to be what it actually was. I did complete the merger with the company. The company was called Vista Distribution USA, Inc. Basically one of the primary things they were doing with that company was shipping and selling hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in small, cheap, inexpensive products that went into like the 7-Eleven convenience stores. Cheap watches, the $9 watch that you go in and you see it running, standing on the counter in the 7-Eleven stores, things of that sort, and the baseball hats and all of that junk that everybody sees when they go into a 7-Eleven. However, the reality was that company was a covert front, an operation for supplying weapons for covert wars all around the world. And it ended up drawing myself in, obviously, once I then, by the way, none of that information is available, of course, when you start talking to someone that wants to buy toys. One seems to have nothing to do with the other. But the idea was for them to utilize my toy company as a front, a covert front for secret weapons supplies for the United States Central Intelligence and covert operations out of Washington, D.C. And so when I made the merger with that company back in 85, 86, in that period of time, when I started, once I was under their roof and had already moved my operation under one of their roofs of their businesses in Atlanta, once I had done that, I was kind of stuck. And then next thing I know, I was being introduced to major military generals out of Washington, D.C., and within a short period of time, they were trying to recruit myself to function as an information courier in and out of different countries around the world, actually, of course, obviously, setting up and carrying out meetings for the sales of military weapons. And, of course, I was not interested in doing that. I was not schooled in that. I had been in the military, but I was not oriented to doing that type of thing. And I broke away from the company. My life was threatened. If I said anything about what was going on, my life was in danger. And coincidentally, however, at that point in time, when I separated, even though I had not been paid properly for my business, and I was chasing the money on that part of it with my lawyer, a friend of mine, what happened at that point in time was when the world realized that a thing called the Iran-Contra investigations out of Washington, which was, of course, the supplying of weapons into Nicaragua and the Contras in Nicaragua, which was being done out of my toy factory. So I became, unknowingly, I became a federal witness, and from there it all started for me, and I've been chasing corrupted government officials for 30 years, ever since that investigation.
Now, my goodness. Brother Bob, I'll tell you now, that is an amazing history that you have right there, and that alone we could probably talk about for an hour or two, huh?
Yeah, probably 10, 20, 40, 60 hours. It's unbelievable. It's amazingly complex. It's a view, if you will, into the secret government operations taking place on a continuing basis, had taken place for many years before I was aware of how corrupted the government had become. And, of course, it is taking place as we speak, and it progressively has gotten worse by multiples of, I'm going to say 20 times worse every 12 months of the year as we move forward through time. It's unbelievable. I'm talking about situations where when the operations of this that I'm talking about, by the way, they actually supplied military helicopters, Hellfire missiles, and major aircraft, as well as small arms and training for entire armies all around the world to maintain a corrupted control on the people of the world, what we call the world government, the New World Order, and all of that is very, very real. It's not made up by the motion picture people out of Hollywood, California. As a matter of fact, what they do is actually tap into real covert secret operations and put together all of those exciting movies everybody likes to watch on that side of the fence. If you're looking for something of that sort, they get that out of real operations taking place out of Washington, D.C.
My gracious. Well, Brother Bob, we're here tonight to talk about one of the greatest conspiracies that's probably in the last 100 years at least. I mean, I know there have been a lot of conspiracies, but this thing, Planet X, is making a comeback right now. Now, I said 100 years. Obviously, Planet X goes way back beyond that, but, it didn't really start coming to the surface until really, from what I've researched, from 1900 until now is when it really started coming to the surface. And more specifically, it seemed like after 1970 into the mid-'80s it was really talked about, and then it disappeared, and now it's making a comeback. So let's just take a moment and talk about, because I believe Planet X is tied into the sixth seal in Bible prophecy. I believe it is probably almost sure what causes that sixth seal. But could you just let's open it up there.
Sure.
And let's talk about Planet X, and just give me all you know on the subject. And where did it start with you?
That'll take a couple of months, but let's just scrape on the surface today. The bottom line is
you run
this.
with it, brother.
Here's, like I say, I've been involved. I literally have been a federal witness, a sworn federal witness in several major inquiries. I'm talking top secret investigations. I actually worked with and completed reports for the Senate Intelligence Committee. I have worked for and with cooperatively some of the few, I use that word, honest senators and congressmen. One was Congressman Sonny Bono, who, of course, was famous as an entertainer and then became a congressman, and was one of the few people up there that couldn't be bought off because he didn't need any money, and couldn't be scared off, probably because he's kind of like myself. He's got more nerve than brains. And I worked with him, supplying him information, a major investigation that I completed back in the 90s. I worked cooperatively with his people out of Washington, and I had supplied him with so much amazing documentation and proof and evidence related to drug smuggling connected into the Central Intelligence and the White House itself. And he was about to launch a major congressional inquiry on the floor of the Congress. We had set up where we were actually going to have subpoena power, which we don't usually have in a congressional inquiry. But subpoena power means that you can force a person to come in and to answer the questions, and if they refuse to answer questions, they can go to jail until they decide to talk. And that's the obvious reason why you will not see that very often in a congressional inquiry, because obviously a lot of people connected to the highest levels of government are afraid to come forward and talk about drug smuggling and murder and that type of thing when you're talking about in front of the Congress. So we had put together an inquiry, was about to launch in 1997, and Sonny was actually murdered over the Christmas holidays so that he would not be able to start that investigation that we had planned. They called me about the 15th of December. They were going on the holidays for the Christmas for about 2 weeks out of the Congress. They were going on their Christmas vacation. They called and they said, Bob, we're ready to go with the congressional inquiry. It'll probably be about the 15th or 20th of January, about 30 days when they get back from holidays. And we're ready to go. They wanted to make sure I was living in California at that time. Want to make sure I was ready to come on into Washington and to get this thing launched. that we had actually been working on for about 9 months. I said, great, that's wonderful. And 10 days after that telephone call, Sonny was murdered on the top of the ski slopes. They told everyone he had run into a tree and he was dead, and that was the end of that investigation. Now, I point that out only to say that that is how serious these people are in terms of having total control over the corruption that's going on out of Washington. All right? If someone at the level that Sonny Bono was as a congressman, if he's about to spill the beans on a major problem, whatever it might have been, a major corrupt activity like the drug smuggling back in the 90s, they are eliminated one way or another, and in Sonny's case, he was murdered, period. End of story. Now, I've done a special investigation on that, which I've made available to anybody that's interested. It is in a DVD form. It's a complete report, very interesting on the Sonny Bono situation. But having said that, let me move forward and talk about what happened with Planet X and how I got into it. About 3 years ago, I started looking at something that had been brought to my attention by several people, and it was basically the fact that there was huge, not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars with a T disappearing out of the federal budgets. So we're talking much more money than I was used to chasing. We used to chase in these variety of corrupted operations. You chase a million or 10 or even $20 million, trying to track that down. When they would, it would show up, let's say, disappeared out of a budget. But a couple of years ago, a fellow named Donald Rumsfeld, who was in charge at that time at the Defense Department, he came forward during a congressional inquiry, and he said that $2.3 trillion had vanished from the Defense Department budgets over a period of a few years. Now, the amount we're talking about now, by the way, 2.3 trillion is the equivalent to writing a check to every man, woman, and child in the United States of America for about $5,000. That's how much 2.3 trillion is. And Donald Rumsfeld, very calmly sat before the Congress and said that that money was missing. They didn't quite know where it was, coming out of defense budgets. Well, the senators and the congressmen, of course, were set back on that. You know, I mean, like I say, they're used to stealing a few million here and there. But when you start talking that kind of money, that's pretty serious. Now, what happened, coincidentally, and it is not coincidental, but what they claim to be a coincidence, that was about 1 day or 2 days before the 9/11 terrorist activity in New York and in the Pentagon. So when 9/11 took place, a day or so after Donald Rumsfeld admitted that they had lost $2 trillion, obviously we never heard the story again. It just disappeared into the smoke of the Twin Towers building in New York City. So the announcement was rather well-timed because it just vanished. So following that, some folks had brought, of course, to my attention the fact that Mr. Ron Paul in the Washington, D.C., had come forward and had asked the Federal Reserve System if he could get an audit on the gold, because the gold out of Fort Knox has been rumored to be gone. It is gone. There is no gold in Fort Knox any longer. And when Ron Paul came forward on the floor of the Congress, the Senate, he asked for have an audit of the gold to make sure that it was all still there, and they told him to simply go away because the Congress and the Senate has no right to even look into the Federal Reserve operations. They cannot request. We cannot request through the Senate or the Congress an actual legitimate audit of all the Federal Reserve gold that supposedly is in Fort Knox. Now, what also happened within a few months, of course, we got to remember back 2010, that period of time, 2008, was when the world banks were in a serious financial crisis. You had Greece, and several of these countries are actually on the border of bankruptcy. And the Federal Reserve in America had to lend them money and put money into bolster up the international banking finance, or it was all going to crash. And that was back around 2010, around that period of time. Now, at that time, Germany and several other nations had come forward and had asked the Federal Reserve the same thing that Ron Paul had asked, and that was, we need an audit because the foreign banks, a lot of people, if you're not into this, you would not know it, the foreign banks around the world for many years have put billions and billions of dollars of gold bullion from their different nations around Europe and around the world, South America, etc. They had deposited tons of gold in the Federal Reserve. And they did it, of course, obviously on the concept that there wouldn't be a safer place in the world to put your gold if you were a small to a medium country and you were worried about takeovers of countries and things of that sort, which goes on all the time, military uprisings. They put tons and tons of gold into the Federal Reserve Fort Knox. When Germany and 6 or 8 other nations came forward in about 2013, 2011, that period of time, they came forward and they said, we need to take some of our gold out of Fort Knox and put it back into our own reserves here so we can stabilize our financial condition. Guess what happened? The Federal Reserve System told those countries that they could not have any gold out of Fort Knox. And the best that they could do for those countries was to give them an audit of the gold, but that would not be until 2020. 7 years, actually. The requests came in around 2013, and in 7 years, the Federal Reserve said they could give them, maybe give them a little bit of gold, or maybe give them an audit and tell them how much was in there being held for them. So, at that point in time, this is a couple of years ago, it really red flagged for me. I thought, wait a minute, something really is rotten in Denmark. We have all this money disappearing from standard legitimate funding out of Washington, just vanishing. And then we have the gold at Fort Knox is gone. I mean, it's gone. If it was there, they would show it to the appropriate people, and they're just not doing that. The bulk of the gold is gone. So, and by the way, to add to that, a fellow that was in charge of the International Monetary Fund, a Frenchman, he came over, flew over, a wealthy billionaire of himself in his own right, flew over in his own jet from Europe, and he requested an audit and said that we have to know, for the International Monetary Fund, we must know what the status is of the gold, what's going on, because it appears that it's all gone. They told him that they were not going to give him an audit for the International Monetary Fund that he headed up in Europe. So he threatened the Federal Reserve System. He told them that if he didn't get an audit and get in to look at the money and account for the gold, that he was going to go on the floor of the United Nations and demand under the United Nations that all of the countries that had put their gold in to Fort Knox would have permission to have a complete audit and to withdraw the gold that they needed right now at this point in time for him, a couple years ago this was, that he wanted to have an audit or the gold itself, taken it back out of the system, and that he was going to force it on the floor of the United Nations. Well, the following week, 2 or 3 days after that threat to the Federal Reserve in New York City, while this gentleman was still in New York City, actually on his plane, getting on his private jet to fly back to Switzerland, to Geneva, wherever he was going at that time, the local New York State Police Department pulled him off his plane, had him arrested on the basis that he had sexually attacked and chased a maid from the hotel he was living in New York City, and had sexually harassed a maid, and they were arresting a billionaire, and they were going to put him in jail in New York City. And the deal that was cut was that if he would shut up his mouth, they would permit him to go home and get on his plane if he didn't bother them about the gold any longer. And so here you have a billionaire in charge of the International Monetary Fund, distribution of money throughout Europe, is arrested with a ridiculous charge. I say ridiculous because I would have to assume that a billionaire that's paying $1,800 a day for a hotel room and flying his own jet with his own crew from Geneva, Switzerland to visit New York is probably not chasing the maid around his hotel room. Of course, he said he wasn't, but that was the end of it. They scandalized this fella, put him back on the airplane, and sent him back to Europe without any information on the gold. So, as I say, to get back to my own situation, I right away I realized, when you're talking about trillions of dollars vanishing, and then you look at the rest of the scene, for example, changes that had taken place for 20 years with the space program being very, very different from what it originally was, and the expansion of what they called continuity of government within the United States, and the fact that they were arming the police departments with military weapons all over the United States, it started to really bother me. It was a matter of what is going on? What is it that would cause these guys, who usually steal what they want to, cover it up, and build them a new home in Tahiti or something for vacations and get away with it? But now they've changed direction. They were doing something else, because you cannot even money launder $1 trillion. If you were the biggest drug smuggler, an arms salesman, you can't money launder $1 trillion. It's impossible. I mean, you could break it down into hundreds of millions, but it's just not what I refer to a common thievery of money that might take place out of a criminal offices in Washington, D.C. It didn't make sense. And then I remembered in the 90s, I had several people contact me, and they said, Bob, I have films of the construction of underground facilities all over the United States. And that came to me from several people. Some of them were truck drivers who told me fantastic stories about having an 18-wheeler, 40-foot truck filled with foodstuffs being delivered into a government facility, and they would follow the map where they were supposed to go, and there was nothing out there. Let's say it was outside of Texas in the desert area, and they would go, and the side of the mountain would open up, and they would drive down inside of a mountain, and it would close behind them. Now, those are fantastic stories, but to me, back in the 90s, they were just that. To myself, that was almost an outrageous kind of a story. They would tell me about going into an underground facility in Tennessee and driving for 600 miles under the ground, those things were a little mind-boggling and pretty fanciful type of a report for me. So I kind of put it on the back shelf. These people sent me pictures, and they sent me what were VHS videos at that time, back in the 90s, and but I didn't know what to make of them. It didn't mean anything, so I sort of put it on the side burner, so to speak, the back burner. But again, now this is about 3 years ago, I started putting all of the dots to connected all of the dots. And what had taken place in approximately 83, apparently with the launching of a new infrared telescope being put way out in the far reaches of the solar system. Apparently, Planet X, or the planet called Nibiru, which is mentioned in all the biblical writings, it's mentioned in all Bibles and scriptures from many foreign nations. It's mentioned in historic writings of the Chinese emperor 2,000 years ago. It's written on the side of the walls of temples that were 4,000 years old. There was a study done a while back of the clay tablets that were from Sumeria that had been completely broken down and analyzed by a man named Sitchin, S-I-T-C-H-I-N, and he had deciphered clay tablets. There's 25,000 of these tablets. They actually went back 4,000 years, and they described Nibiru, the planet X, and its relationship to coming back like Halley's Comet, coming back and going around the sun every once in a while, and then going way back out again in orbit, way out past Pluto, and coming back again in a couple thousand years. And this coincided with the biblical talk. It was called wormwood in the Bible, and it's described in, like I said, a whole multiple of whether they're not necessarily all Christian writings, but nonetheless these are biblical scriptures of sorts coming from around the globe, 2,000, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago in the case of the Sumerian clay tablets. So what they described is Nibiru being a planet in a huge elliptical orbit, similar to that. Like I say, I compare it to Halley's Comet that comes by every 75 years. There's another comet that we recently discovered that came around in 1997. That was called the Hale-Bopp Comet. It is similar to Halley's Comet, except that the orbit that the Hale-Bopp Comet is in has been calculated to be 4,200 years. Now that's 600 to 800 years longer than the proposed orbit of Nibiru, or Planet X. So originally I thought, wow, you talk about 3,000 year, 3,600 year orbit of a planet. That's really amazingly large. I thought almost that was ridiculous. But once I realized and got into it and found out that we did have the Hale-Bopp Comet of 4,000 years, well, then that took my excuse, looking like it was a crazy number, that just erased that. So I started studying the people that really have been into studying the planet X or Nibiru for many, many lifetimes, or a long time, or following up on other people's studies. And there's several people that have spent their entire last 30 or 40 years just studying the astronomical potential of Planet X. Now, and get back to where I was, in 1983, apparently it was discovered sufficiently that scientific people at a very high level came into President Reagan and George Bush, the vice president, and said, we got a problem. It looks like now we found Planet X that's been talked about, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning. It's been talked about at least and written about, of course, going way back, but been in modern times, in 1960 and 50, there was writings about it in Life magazine and Reader's Digest and Lookton magazine, all the major media of that time in the 50s and the 60s. But apparently in around 83, Ronald Reagan and his people were told that this is on its way back in and that it had been discovered, and now what are we going to do? All right? So at that point, it changed everything in Washington. And what you had now was this handful of large numbers of, I'm going to refer to them all as, excuse me, criminal, corrupted persons out of government, and they decided that what we have to do, obviously, is if this thing's coming back, we've got to expand underground facilities that are going to hold enough people so that our families and our immediate, most important, wealthy people of the United States are going to have a place to hide. They called it continuity of government, and they built 103 of these underground facilities underground in the United States. When I started investigating, I ended up being able to get plenty of information on them, including most of the locations. Additionally, we have live footage and photographs of the underground facilities. Again, not all of them. Most of them, of course, are secret to above top secret in their classification. I also started looking into it to find out what the status was on other foreign nations, because something of this sort, coming back, a biblical event that will devastate the globe, obviously has to be known also to the highest levels of other governments. What I found out is that Russia in 2010 put out a mandate that by 2015 that they would have 5,000 underground facilities prepared for as many people as they could in Russia. I found out they had one large facility. Actually, they have several large, but one of them's big enough to hold as many as 30,000 or 40,000 people underground. I discovered that the European major nations have been also building underground facilities. And then I also discovered, which anybody can look up because it is part of public information in general, you can look up what's called the Seed Vault of Norway or Denmark. They have built a giant international cooperative seed vault, maintains billions of seeds in the to be hidden away. It's underground in the side of a mountain. You can look it up on a computer. Just put International Seed Vault, and you can find it yourself on the computer. This is a storage facility maintaining all of the necessary seeds to reseed the globe, the entire face of the earth, or as much as they want or can, after the complete devastation similar to the original floods of Noah, which is what Nibiru, Planet X, will potentially bring upon the globe when it comes close to the earth. Now, I'm going to take a brief pause here, get a drink of water, and if you have any questions up to this point in time, feel free to shout them out at me and let me know what you would like to ask.
Absolutely, Brother Bob. I'm telling you, this is getting better and better by the minute. Wormwood in the Bible, to me, is more referring to a meteor falling into the waters, and I don't believe it's specifically talking about Planet X. However, Doug Elwell, author, says, author of the Planet X and the Sign of Coming of Son of Man, says he sees Planet X in the Bible through his understandings of Scriptures. Now I myself, I draw more of a speculative conclusion that the apocalyptic events in the Bible that are talked about in the tribulation are brought about by Planet X. I can't say I can see it clearly in the scriptures, although I do believe it can be theorized that Planet X is the cause for some of the biblical events talked about concerning Bible prophecy, and that's I do have that theory because
However, this is going to answer your question, and it fits both case situations. First off, it's not going to be a theory. All right, it's been researched sufficiently that the Planet X has come around several times in the past. Now, and when it has happened, it has varied in the degree of devastation. However, it has come around several times, and this is documented geologically, etc. But here's what you're looking at that fits both, or actually 5 situations, if you will, but at least the 2 that you mentioned. And it's not a matter of theory in terms of the wormwood and meteors falling.
Sure, because that's the case right there. That is going to happen.
Right. And now I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to happen according to putting together all of the dots, connecting all of the dots, not only political, historical, biblical, and non-biblical scriptures written on the top of the mountains by the Tibetan monks that recorded it when it came around, and the emperors of China that wrote it down. And it's a fellow named Gil Brouchard who has done unbelievable, wonderful investigations on the biblical side of this and can explain a day-to-day description of when it has passed previously and what had taken place and what will take place once again when it passes around the sun and back out.
Gil has been on the show.
Okay, you know Gil, you know his work. I am completely in line with about every single thing that Gil has come up with, but the only difference between he and I is that I brought in all of the other dots. I've connected the politics, the money, the theft, the fraud, and the corruption, and put it all together, the underground facilities that have been built by these people, stealing your money and our money to build them, by the way. You know, billions of dollars under the ground in these facilities. They're so huge, they would take your breath away. Now, let me get back to my point, though. Here's the basics of what is described to most likely take place, and this relates to the scriptures, and I'm calling it that because it's just written word, not only biblical, but of all other ancient scribes that have put all this down in black and white, so to speak, going back many years, when they have actually, some of the people that had survived the previous passes and wrote about it and inscribed it in clay and did it in bronze castings and things of that sort, describing what took place. And of course, they didn't understand what it was, but they described it exactly as it most likely will happen again. Now, here's where it fits into wormwood and the meteor falling into the water and all of that. That's all obviously written in reasonably plain words in the Bible, so to speak. You don't have to draw too many wild conclusions about what's being described as things splashing into the ocean, etc., and causing great tidal waves, by the way. Tidal waves are going to be unbelievable, tsunamis when this comes around. But it will also be, part of that will be like Noah's flood, and it will be this planet, which is 5 times, calculated to be 5 times the size of Earth, will have a gravitational effect on the Earth that hasn't been seen since it came by the last time. Now, here's what basically will take place. When it comes back around, it will come in, and this is even according to Gil Brouchard's wonderful work that he's done. It will come in and circle around the sun. It will go behind the sun. When it does, you have to remember this is going to be similar to what we see when we watch the Halley's Comet, when it goes by around the sun, but it's way, way, way out, and it's basically, that's just a frozen snowball, to make a simple description of it. So it comes around the sun, it has a long tail behind it, dragging behind it, goes around the sun, goes back out in a short time later, and goes back out for 75 years, not to return again for 75 years. The Hale-Bopp comet that I mentioned earlier does exactly the same thing, but it was bigger, by the way, than the Halley's Comet, and it drags its tail around behind the sun and then goes back out again, heading towards the far reaches of the solar system again. Now, when Planet X or Nibiru comes around, the difference is, number one, it is a solid mass 5 times the size of Earth. It will cause an eclipse of the sun for a period of time. It has 3 or 4 planets that are actually, I'm going to refer to them as moons, that travel with it and travel around it, similar to the situation with our moon relative to Earth. The moons will be dragged around with Nibiru at the same time. And then we will have a tail of debris being dragged along, gravitationally sucked along behind this the primary planet Nibiru. When it comes by, it will travel behind the sun. The Earth, on its regular rotation around the sun, will in fact pass through the tail of Nibiru. When it does that, you will have the equivalent of the biblical meteorites that fell upon the Earth in hail and brimstone. They didn't know how to describe it, but basically we're going to have flaming meteors of different sizes, meteorites, crashing. Actually, we will be crashing through that debris. It will take about an hour travel time to pass through it. Then, bearing in mind now, the Nibiru would be ahead of the Earth, going around the sun, and it will take about 155 days for Nibiru to come out the other side and head back towards outer space once again, not to come back for some unknown period of time. Now, there's a debate between 2 or 3 different groups of people that have been studying this, and that's okay, because it doesn't affect the bottom line on this. The debate is whether it comes around in 3,005 or 3,600 years, or if it comes around 350 years, which is closer to the figure that Gil Broussard believes in, doing his studies. And he has very good information to back that potentially up in terms of the numbers of years. All right, so here's what I'm saying, where it doesn't make any difference to you and I. If this comes around in our lifetime, then we're talking, it doesn't make any difference if it's been out for 3,000 years or if it has come around 10 times 3, 10 times 300, which would be 3,000 years, and coming around 10 times since that same period of time. So in other words, it doesn't make any difference if it's 3,000 or if it's coming around every 300 and 350 years. It does not make any difference, because if it comes during our lifetime, we are the ones that will have to face whatever it will bring with it. And the meteorites, those things where the biblical students talk about that being what is written of in the wormwood, I believe what it is in reality, it is Nibiru itself is the wormwood, and all of the debris that will hit Earth when we go through the tail of that thing. Actually, we will plunge through the tail, and it will take whatever. I think it's about 1 hour of actual going through the tail itself. It's actually mathematically been analyzed, but that will bring with it, you see, that will bring with it a multitude of meteors, etc. And I must say this, we already have an increase and a multitude of effects today from Nibiru, and I'll be glad to talk about a whole bunch of that when we get back.
Yeah, that's
so you
great.
Have to take
We're
a break.
almost at the top of the hour break, and I'm having just such a good time talking to you tonight. We are on with Bob Fletcher, BobFletcherInvestigations.com. Just in 5 minutes, we're going to hit a break. But before we do, I want to talk about one more thing. And then when we come back from the break, I've already talked pre-show with Brother Bob about doing some questions. So I'm going to let some of our callers ask Bob Fletcher questions concerning Planet X. Now, I'm sure someone's going to want to know, when is this thing going to come? When are you expecting it? Now, I've talked to Brother Gil Broussard a lot, both on the air and off the air. We've had conversations late in the evening, and he's went over all of his different research with me privately, and the man is incredible. But, Bob, you're an incredible investigative researcher yourself. So before we go any further, I want to leave you with this thought, and then we're going to come back on the other side of the break, and we're going to take questions. So my father's on here, and Big Mike is on here. John Glencoe's on here. I think there's a couple others. I'm going to try to check with each of you to see if you have a question pertaining to Planet X or a comment. But before we do this, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hear this. January the 16th, 2015. Oh, before I say this, and this is important, if you want to hear Donald Rumsfeld for yourself announce to the world that $2.3 trillion went missing, you can hear that on YouTube. It's chronicled. That's a matter of record. I mean, you can pull the video up on YouTube, and you can watch it for yourself. He announces that to the world, and then, I believe it was September the 10th, 2001. Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, it's about 1 or 2 days before the 9/11. And by the way, everything that I'm talking about and many, many more items of extreme importance, totally just on this incoming of Nibiru and Planet X, the return, is in a double DVD that's available to everyone. I worked 3 years putting it together. It's extraordinary in the content. Live, we have Donald Rumsfeld's on there, but I have live pictures. I have even pictures of the Chinese underground facilities, the Russian underground facilities. I have everything covered. I have even the Vatican's side to this thing because they're aware of it and they are part of keeping it secret. I have everything that you would ever ask in a question has been answered on our DVD, and it is available to everyone through my website. But I'm going to get off now, and you go ahead, and when you want to have some questions, I'll be glad to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'm just going to tell you that I can't. But I will probably be able to answer any questions you have.
Awesome, and that DVD is available at BobFletcherInvestigations.com. Now listen, when you go to BobFletcherInvestigations.com, you are going to see a lot more than just a DVD there. I mean, you read the articles and the reviews that people have written on his website for yourself. They're right there in plain English. You can see what people are saying about Bob Fletcher's investigation. But listen, before we take the break, and we're going to do that here in just a couple minutes, it's 10:57 East Coast time, Interstellar Realities Radio, blogtalkradio.com/Interstellar Realities. Before we take the break, I want to leave you with this. It was January the 16th, 2015. Space.com, okay? Now, we're not talking about BelieveAlie.com or Gullible.com or DopeyTheDwarf.com, okay? And if those websites are real, I'm not trying to be critical of those websites, but it's just to prove a point. Space.com is a very credible website. I mean, this website may not be the most credible in the world, I don't know, but I know that they put some good information on it. It's trafficked a lot by a lot of people. January the 16th, 2015. Here's the article. Space.com. Mysterious Planet X may really lurk undiscovered in our solar system. Now, that alone is curious to me because at one time, 6, 8, 10 years ago, you were laughed off the face of the earth almost. You were laughed to no end. People laughed at you if you mentioned Planet X. The mainstream denied it. NASA had scientists on YouTube deny it. No way, hee hee ha ha, can't exist. Forget it. But now, all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, and I was down in my dad's house, sitting around the kitchen table with my dad, the kitchen counter, when CNN started talking about the possibility of these planets. They started announcing a new planet and all this stuff. And I said, Dad, don't you remember when we were, and I called Pastor Shannon Rust, and I said, when I was researching Planet X back in 07 and 08, people that were into Planet X said, listen, right before this thing starts appearing, they're going to start leaking it out slowly. Back then they were denying it vehemently, but today they're leaking it out slowly. So back up to January 16th, 2015, an article on space.com, mysterious Planet X may really lurk undiscovered in our solar system. And I'll just read a couple lines of it. We're going to hit the break and bounce back. It says this, Planet X might actually exist, and so might Planet Y. At least two planets larger than Earth likely lurk in the dark depths of space far beyond Pluto, just waiting to be discovered. A new analysis of the orbits of extreme trans-Neptunian objects suggests. Okay, can't say anything else. I hope that's a cliffhanger for you. We're going to be back with more on this article and much, much more from Brother Bob Fletcher. This is Interstellar Realities Radio. Friend, I was once again tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains of western Pennsylvania. We are live with Bob Fletcher. My dad is now live with us as well. We have red mics on Dad, red mics on Big Mike. Brother John Glencoe, I see you out there, and I want to get to you, my friend, too, as soon as we can. But, Dad, Big Mike, you're on live now, and you've heard Bob talk here for the last hour, and he has covered a lot of stuff. I'll be honest, the first 30 minutes was over my head. I mean, the stuff he was disclosing to us about the United States government and all the different, the scandals, the things that have happened that no one knows about, and his toy company and all those things. I'll be honest, I wasn't quite ready for all that. I was just floored by that information. But now we're trekking with Planet X, something that we have all talked about privately, probably on the radio show before. So, Dad, Big Mike, you're on with Bob. Want to use, if you could, fire out a question or a comment you have pertaining to what he's been talking about this mystery body. Maybe it's a simple question, maybe it's something more complex, but he'd be glad to take a shot at it, and I'd be glad to listen. So, Dad, Big Mike, go ahead.
Okay, either one of you jump in here.
Good, Steve.
I'm not hearing anything.
I have them both off the mute, and I cannot hear my dad if he's talking, and I apologize for that. This is live radio. We make no apologies for that. So, Dad, I can't pick up on you right now. Big Mike, do you have a question? And if you don't have a question or a comment, we'll kick it over to Brother John Glencoe and see what he has to say.
I actually don't have a question. I mean, I'm just listening to everything he's saying. I'm like you, it's just kind of mind-boggling, but I mean, I don't see nothing out of context. I believe what he's saying, you know. I mean, makes sense to me, but I don't have a question. Let John fire away at him.
All right, we'll kick it to Brother John Glencoe coming at you live from on the other side of the mountain, literally. Brother John, you've been on here for a while. I know you're very acquainted with the subject material that we're presenting here tonight. Do you have a question for Brother Bob Fletcher concerning Planet X?
Well, first of all, I want to say, you know, I've really appreciated what Bob has to say. It makes sense. Basically, as I have viewed the events of our, let's say, of my lifetime, particularly since, let's say, 2001, 9/11, it makes sense. I do remember Rumsfeld's comment, and it was an attention getter. And then, of course, unfortunately, the tragic events of 9/11 follows thereafter. You know, the thing that I would just curious about as well is I pay attention to the headlines, particularly what's happening, particularly in the Middle East today. I believe that today's headlines are splashed all over the Book of Daniel, as well as the Book of Revelation.
Sure.
And
yes, sir.
What I'm really curious about, and I think, Brother Bob, you mentioned this a little earlier, I am of the opinion, and that's all I like to say, I am of the opinion that it wouldn't surprise me that right now, I know that there would be many that would disagree, then I believe that the Lord Jesus already has had the seal that he's taken from God the Father, and he's already opened at least the first 5 seals. The more recent case of again, the Christian martyrs, I think there was 120 some school children that were just killed here in Africa not long ago. You know, in the 5th seal we hear the cries of the martyrs, but in the 6th seal, we know here, you know, obviously the gravitational equilibrium of the Earth is going to be, you know, disturbed. You know, space is a very, very weak fluid, but nonetheless will behave fluid dynamics. When you get something as large as, you know, a Nibiru or Planet X or whatever you want to call it, is coming close. Offhand, I have not found research. Of course, maybe I haven't dug deep enough either to estimate how close it is going to be passing within the sun or within the Earth. But anything that's within the interplanet orbital sequence, 5 times larger than the Earth, is going to have some effect.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if I might jump back in here, it's and I'm going to answer here in the next hour. I'm going to answer probably every question that might come across your mind, and if I don't accomplish it in the next hour, perchance, my DVD set, which covers everything, because I wanted to, this required an extensive amount of research, but it required that it be completely answered the best we could. So I brought in all the variables, et cetera, into it. In the DVD set, by the way, is 4 hours long. It's more information than you could ever imagine, and it's kind of like having a library on 2 discs. It's really extensive. It's a little tedious. I wish, in fact, that we could have done it in less time, but I literally had hacked an entire hour out of it to bring it down to 2 discs of 2 hours each. But we answer about every question. Now, when we talk about the effects of Nibiru, it's the problem is going to be it's a multitude of effects on the Earth because of what you just mentioned, the gravitational effect. We unless you really get into studying the planets, et cetera, and become astronomically educated, which I don't pretend to be. I'm the messenger relative to that information put together by 1,000 astronomers and scientists over a couple thousand years. And I don't pretend to be the 100% expert on all of that. But I was able, because of my background, I was able to connect the dots, to make sense out of things. It's like, why wouldn't, for example, over since 1983, which is a period of time when this, I believe, the realization really settled in to the bad guys in Washington that this was a reality and was going to change their lousy, corrupted plans, because all of a sudden they had to worry about survival of their own people and their families. So it changed things from just plain stealing and going about their normal one world government concept. This sort of threw a monkey wrench into it. And in 1983,
let me ask a quick question, if I could.
Sure, yes, sir. Go ahead.
The current Mideast flare-up, which I believe is not only mentioned in Daniel, perhaps also Psalm 83, according to Brother Bill Salas. Timeline. Excuse me, I'm fighting a little bit of a head cold here. With respect to the timeline, do you see this happen concurrently, or
yes,
or soon or shortly thereafter? I mean, are the Middle Eastern nations aware as well as what is about to befall, or do you think they're somewhat ignorant or skeptical of such things?
Okay, well, and I'm going to answer all of that anyhow right along the line here, but let me say this out in front. To answer your questions, the people at the highest levels of all major governments are aware of it, period.
Okay.
All right. Bearing that in mind, because the wealthiest, biggest nations are all digging holes to go underground. They have them finished for the most part. They're continuing them, making them better, making them bigger, and making them more full with survival materials and foods for themselves in the United States and all the rest of around the globe. Now, relative to the Mideast, see, that's all amazingly biblical. The outrageous increase and expansion of this ISIS group. Well, they're literally, they're not a handful of bandits.
Oh, that's
They
true.
now are extraordinarily wealthy. They have billions of dollars that they have stolen. They just went right, not counting what they may have different countries backing them that we don't know about, corrupted governments, but they literally went into bank after bank and stole every penny that was in there, whether it was American dollars, gold on deposit, or in fact dinars, their own money. They have billions of dollars in their pockets. They have stolen billions and taken over billions of dollars worth of extraordinarily serious weapons. These guys have serious weapons. They're not throwing stones and picking up pistols with six-shooters. They have missiles. They've got everything you would want to continue what they're doing. It is biblical, obviously. It's the amazing confrontation of the Muslim versus the Christians. If people don't realize that and how biblical that is, they might as well just go back to sleep and have another drink, because they're just not paying attention. So all of that, do they know? Certainly. And they are, in fact, their thing is, let's grab what we can and do what we can. Let's go out. It's kind of like a couple of kids that get together and they want to do vandalism on Halloween night. And they say, here's our time. Let's go out and do all the crazy things we wanted to ever do, because we don't have a lot of time before it hits the fan. And so they're doing it, and yes, do they know about it? The guys at the upper level that are running the ISIS group, they certainly know it, and they want to fit into what they would refer to as their biblical history in the future. So to answer that part of it, now the figure, the timeline in 1983, by the way, which being approximately when it really was seriously accepted in Washington behind closed doors that this thing was coming back and it's going to really do a number on the earth, period. It will constitute Noah's floods once again. The earth more than likely will end up tilting 26 degrees on the axis of Earth. This was analyzed and figured out very astutely by Gil Broussard originally. I don't know if anyone else realized it like he did, but the biblical accounts and the worldwide accounts, going back to the old emperors in China who wrote these things down in diaries. And by the way, in China 1,000 years ago, when the emperor had a lot of astronomers working for him, all right, 1,000 years ago, and if they made mistakes, he cut their heads off. So this isn't stuff that these guys were making up. And they literally tracked what they called the flaming dragon or the visiting star.
Yes.
They tracked that across the sky for the 155 days that it took to go around the sun and back out. During that period of time, on the entire globe, there was global reaction of floods, crazy weather, meteor storms, fires, everything that you could imagine. And by the way, one reason that they know that it was a 26-degree shift of the axis is that one of the a particular thing called the sky disk, called the sky disk, was discovered. That was literally done. It was a 12-inch Bronze Age disk that on it is the description of the passing of Nibiru, causing the blocking of the sun, the eclipse of the sun, for a period of time. When it passed, there were actually galactic. All the stars were written and drawn into this. It's like a picture. It's a 12-inch piece of bronze highlighted in gold, which, by the way, I have all of that in the DVD that I have also. All of this is in there. The sky disk describes the passing of Nibiru on, like, I'm going to call it like a drawing, although it's or an engraving, done on a big piece of bronze. It was discovered in 1999 in Germany. And so these people had survived it, and they drew the equivalent of drawing a picture of this thing passing. And you can see it very clearly in the DVD that we have. But the sky disk was dated. Now, this is really great, because if you're not into astronomy and things like that, you wouldn't even know what I'm about to tell you. But we have computer programs now that they can put, if they have a drawing of where the stars in the sky were located, all right? Something that was drawn at any point in time going back 4,000 years at this point, you can put it in a computer program and it will give you the exact day, not only the day that it was done and the year and the month, but the hour of the day that it was created. It's like, if in other words, you're saying if you take a drawing that could be the equivalent of a photograph of what was in the sky over Germany, and that's when this was where it was done. This was done 3,600 years ago, and it described Nibiru passing at that time. All right, and it gives it. It says it was, I believe, if I'm going by memory now because I don't have it in front of me, I think it was April the 10th of 3,600 years ago, April the 10th at 8:30 in the morning, and that's how accurate the computers can regress and go back and tell you, as long as it's got enough star markers, actual recognizable constellations, they can tell you when it took place. Now, we have that. That's also part of Gil Broussard's studies. The amount of information that has been generated from many, many people studying this brings it down to where we can do a rough calculation as to when Nibiru may pass through close by once again, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. The big deal is this. Here's what's going to happen, provided if, and I have to preface this. 5 years ago, if you had come to me and asked me to even do a study or even look into this report on Planet X, et cetera, with the knowledge information I had 5 years ago, I would not have touched this with a 50-foot pole. I'm not going to put my name on a report as crazy sounding as this was or would have been. I would never put my name on it. I wouldn't have touched it. But progressively, I realized that the only thing, and once I learned all the information that has been put together on Nibiru and its previous passing, and the biblical scriptures about it, once I had learned that and put it together with everything else, there is nothing else on the face of the earth that would cause the major governments of the world to dig survivable space under the ground and into the sides of the mountains to hide themselves away. There's nothing else that fits it, period.
I would
nothing.
agree.
They have taken over, we have taken, in the United States, we have taken over what was NORAD's facilities in Cheyenne Mountain. There are no longer equipment in there for checking and tracking missiles and weapons of that sort. That's what it was originally built for. It has been taken over. It is one of the new hideouts for the elite to run into the mountains when Nibiru passes close. It's one of the 100 and some that we have in America. The Chinese have thousands, and I have pictures and films of this The Chinese actually have facilities so large under the mountains, into the mountains, and the sides of hills that they have stored entire fleets of airplanes and battleships. And I have pictures of all of those in the DVDs that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm looking on your website. It looks really interesting. It's one that I would definitely like to spend some time going over.
You have to, and it has to be done. You have to go, like I say, it's actually 4 hours of total information. It's mind-boggling. You have to go over it and then go over it again and take your time, etc. It's not something you can skim through. It literally is the most important report that I have ever done, and I have done reports at the request of the Senate Intelligence Committees. I have done reports directly for dictator Manuel Noriega's lawyers. I have done reports for congressional and Senate investigations for 25 years, and I would never do this as a frivolous bunch of baloney. I am absolutely a complete, firm believer in what I have completed here.
Now
go ahead.
One question. Maybe you've answered this in your DVD. Obviously, I don't know yet, but
sure.
I'm very much aware that of the, particularly even since the start of this year, the increase in seismic and volcanic activity around the Earth. Now, normally we would, geologists would explain this as, plate tectonics, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. But what I'm curious now is this. Again, I'm somewhat handicapped. I do not know, the velocity of planet X. I don't know how close we are. But any, when you have a pressure wave in front of a moving object, even something a thin fluid as space, could some of this be?
Let me answer your question. I see where you're at. Let me answer that. Okay.
Is this a precursor? Is this some of this?
No, absolutely it is. And I put, now you have to understand something. Now I completed and had the original release of my report, the DVD disc. It's called Incoming. I called it Incoming, the story of Nibiru. That disc was completed about the end of 2014. All right, about like October, November was when I first started talking about it. It was available about that time. So that's going back, 6 months or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I had genuinely finished what I would consider the research and putting in the information and trying to edit this thing and all is just a mind-boggling. Like I said, the amount of information and whatever that's in it. The editing is just unbelievable. So my point is this. Back at that time, let's say as of before the first of this year, at the end of last year, of 2014, 7 months ago, it was done. It was finished and was down in California being manufactured, being made available, okay? Now, in there, I included some of the following. I said that the winter that we have going through now, and just, so to speak, phasing out of now, would be probably the most record-breaking winter in 100 years, and it is. In California, they're going into now the fourth year of a drought that by the end of another couple of months, California will not be able to grow anything for 50 years. It's the devastating amount of drought and destruction to the crops in the southwest area of the United States is permanently devastating, probably injuring it already today to the tune of maybe 25 years before it gets back on its ground. Now, if it ever does. In the Northeast, all right, in New Jersey, New York, up there, Connecticut, the worst winter they have ever experienced since keeping records. I predicted that in the DVD. You will see that in the DVD where I talk about it. All right? The death The animals are still falling out of the sky. You know, we still have that. You know that thing? It's been going on for about 4 years. You know,
Yes,
millions of fish over here in Idaho. 60 days ago, we had 2,000 Canadian geese fall dead from the sky in Idaho about 4 weeks ago.
See, that was not on any news report that I would have picked up.
Yeah, and again, and when you know this, you can look it up, and you will find it, in some little crack someplace.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, fortunately, because of the internet, you can look these little things up. Okay, but if you're not a guy like myself who does it full time for the last 30 years. See, I have my tentacles are out all over the place. I have people call me about some stuff that I don't even want to hear. I mean, talking about goofy things. But I always have my feelers out. And when you put it all together, all of a sudden you look at it and say, oh, wow, wait a minute. Like how come there's like in the last 4 years, 4 years, how come there's astronomers dying? People that are studying Planet X are being killed. 12 of them in one gondola in Switzerland at a meeting of astronomers, guys that were working on Planet X information. The cable broke, and 12 of them were dead. End of story for those guys. There's about 50 of them in the last few years. As of today, there's probably 50 dead bankers, guys that were 29-year-old heads of international banking overseas that killed themselves. The numbers of bankers who are finding out about the application of funds and where the money's disappearing to is tremendous. They're all dead. They're killing them. They're killing them like crazy to keep them quiet. A lot of other people, good friend of mine, a fellow in 95 that I had met. His name's Phil Schneider. He was an engineer in some of these underground facilities back in the 90s. He had built and designed 13 of them for the government. He went out and started talking about things that he had discovered underground, and he told me, I was with him in 95, my wife and I. We had dinner, and he said they're trying to kill me. They said they're going to kill me. There's no question about it. They can't handle what I'm talking about. I'm explaining these underground facilities. They're going to take me out. And he said, he sat down with me, as a matter of fact, and he said, I'm telling people things here in 95 that they don't understand, don't believe, that it's way over their head. He said, Bob, you've been on the road doing these presentations for a while. Is there anything I can do so that the people will believe me, that this stuff is real, what I'm telling them? And, of course, he had some extraordinary tales. And I said, and some of the things back then, I wasn't sure. I didn't know if this guy was pulling my leg, pulling everybody's leg. But when he sat down with me and he said, I need your help, because if I should leave some of it out, tell me what to do with that. Do I dare talk about this and this and this, or should I only tell them half of what I know? What do you think, Bob? And then, of course, I answered the best I could. But also, before I left, we were speaking together at I think it was in Denver, Colorado. And before I left, he said, I want to give you some of my books because I worry about being dead, so being killed, eliminated. And so I took some of his books. He gave me things, included his father's book, a couple things of his father's, when he was an engineering designer for Adolf Hitler. It was very precious stuff for him. But he passed them on to me, and 2 weeks later he was murdered. He was dead.
Wow.
So the point that I'm making about this is that if this stuff is not serious, and if the bad guys are not really trying to keep this stuff quiet, then why are they doing all these things? Why are they creating drills that can go inside a granite mountain and bore a hole big enough so that it goes in and they back it out and you can drive an 18-wheeler in the hole that they just dug? In China, they are so concerned with getting these underground facilities completed, they built the drill that I'm just described to you, but 3 times that size, so that, think about that. Now, I'm talking about a drill that can go into the side of a mountain and drill a hole, come back out and be big enough for an 18-wheeler to drive in the hole. Now we're talking...
Like a tunnel boring machine that we know of, for example, that built the tunnel under the English Channel. Yeah, it's a big...
Okay, but the Chinese have built one that's one on each side of the size that I was just talking about, and then one in the middle that's 1.5 as big as both of those. And it's all on one big operation, one big drill. That's what the Chinese are doing. Now, these people aren't stupid. So if they're doing it, and our government's doing it, and the European governments are doing it, and Russia is doing it, why? All right? Now, they are also filling it with survival foods. Survival foods for many years for thousands of people into all of these facilities. They are putting that in last year and this year on the basis that they're going to need it in the next couple of years. They're not putting it in for 50 years down the road. They're putting it in for tomorrow. They're putting it in for as soon as they need it, it's going to be there. And they're already full up to the brim with survival foods. All right? Next question. People ask, it's been on go ahead.
Okay. Next question I have, obviously, I was listening to you, I was reading down here through chapter 6, 7, and 8 of the book of Revelation. And now, as I've even stated on my radio show, which is tomorrow night, with limited knowledge based on what I've read here over the last couple of years about Planet X, the effects that I read here in about the sixth seal being broken makes perfect sense, with the passage of Planet X. Gravitational disturbances will shift the poles, which would cause the stars to be out of place, as John the Revelator, referred to. But as I look at this, obviously there will be casualties, those that are not, in quotes, selected or allowed to hide away. But also, Scripture is rather clear that there's going to be a large number that are going to obviously survive the passing of this thing. But what I'm curious about, and this is just an opinion, I'm just asking an opinion question, is going to somewhat come out of the clear blue sky. I believe, in the rapture of the true believer, the removal, Scripture tells us we're spared from God's wrath. I do not really look at God's wrath beginning until pretty much after the seventh seal is broken. And so what I'm curious is, with respect to just getting your opinion, the rapture of the church, and I am a pre-tribulation rapture person, where do you see the rapture fitting in? I took some notes here. I would like to say it's before, but it would seem logical to me that it could be during, or perhaps shortly thereafter, the passing of this planet. Do you have any thoughts on such things?
Well, okay. No, fortunately, you hit. It makes it a little bit vague, so to speak, because fitting in the biblical scripture that you're referring to in terms of the rapture, and unfortunately, it as we speak about Nibiru doing its standard physical effects that I believe, unfortunately, it's going to do. And by the way, I would hope to be completely wrong on this, okay? I wish I was totally wrong, and that a couple of years down the line we could get back on your program and laugh about it, that in fact we're still here. But I don't believe that to be the case. All right, in terms of everyone's belief and understanding of the rapture, of course, is widely varied. Every Christian you talk about has a slight variation on the theme, so to speak. But it could, if it happens as we and people of the Christian faith believe in the rapture, those that do, like yourself, the answer to your question, you already answered it. It could happen before, during, or after the passing of Nibiru. Nibiru is the effects will be, if it does as it is projected by the people that have studied it, not only the biblical and historical part, but the potential scientific possibilities that could take place, and then all the rest of that, and astronomical studies of it, that part of it. Putting it all together, it does not necessarily the end of Earth, all right, or the end of all of humanity.
Oh, no,
But it is, I believe, unfortunately, just strictly from looking at the fact that it previously has passed by, that it will cause tremendous floods, number one, due to the gravitational effects on the globe in general, pulling and pushing. You know, we forget that the moon and the sun just floating around out here is what causes the variation of the tides every day. The tides go in, they go out, and it's a very minuscule gravitational effect. It's very small. You take an item 5 times or 7 times the size of Earth, that's a solid mass for the most part, and have it pass someplace between us and the sun, going around let's say going around the sun and then coming back out. From that point of view, the gravitational effect will yank the oceans right out of the seabeds, as was described in Noah's floods. They didn't. They had no idea where the rains would come for 40 days and all of that. But there's a lot of things also, like the stars. I'm going to give you a simple possibility when we talk about the stars disappearing from the sky for a period of time. All right, that happened the last time Yellowstone's volcanic mountain blew up. When you looked up, if you were in the middle of the United States for the following 5 months or so, you wouldn't see any stars.
That's true.
So to a biblical person, it doesn't have to mean that the entire Earth is moved in its location or anything like that. If we have 15 volcanoes go off, serious ones, at one time, the stars will disappear for some unknown period of time. And all we're talking about is the residue in the air, the dust and the junk in the air. Even if you didn't have Nibiru, okay? Follow me? And by the way, I also predict in my DVD there several months ago when we finished it that volcanoes would be reactivated. They already are. Are you aware that there are as many as 45 active volcanoes as we speak blowing the top?
Yes,
45
as a matter of fact, I
today.
am. It's something I check out somewhat frequently.
Right. Yeah,
and also the dramatic increase in
right.
earthquakes.
Yes, and in volcanic activity. Most people are not aware of it.
It's gone up dramatically here, particularly within the last year on a consistent basis.
Yes, sir. And I describe it as this. I describe Nibiru's return. It's beginning to come back in from way, way far out beyond Pluto, and crashing its way back again through the solar system. And I described it as kind of like a bowling ball going down the alley and hitting the pins, because as it goes through outer space, you know, our entire solar system is as sensitive as the human body. And if you hit your toe real bad, you get that signal up in your brain real fast. All right. If you have difficulty walking or problems with your feeling on the end of the fingertips, you know all about that real quick. That affects your entire body, and that's what's happening already. That's why in the last few years, the tremendous numbers of animals, the whales don't know they don't know where to go. They don't know north from south. The birds are having problems. The bees are having problems. They can't find their hives. All right. The other day, by the way, I also mentioned in the DVD, be aware of the aurora borealis starting to pick up, and that's primarily from solar flares and electromagnetic forces coming out of the sun. The sun, as we speak, in the last 6 months to a year, has had some of the craziest reactions to something that it has had in 1,000 years. We're watching electromagnetic storms. Tomorrow, they're anticipating the possibility of us being hit tomorrow, actually, being hit with an extraordinary solar flare. We're going to be lucky if it misses us, because a big one took off day before yesterday, and if, in fact, depending on the location of it when the sun was facing Earth, as to whether we get a big one or a little one. Janet Napolitano, when she quit her job in head of the Homeland Security several months back, about maybe a year ago now, and also James Woolsey, the head of the Central Intelligence, he quit about the same period of time. Both of them, upon leaving, made a statement that everybody better be aware that we will be struck by electromagnetic force, probably from the sun, that will shut down half of the globe electronically. They both said, in their actual words, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when. And they would not elaborate. They didn't get into the fact that it's Nibiru's effects. But nonetheless, my opinion is that that's what's doing it. My opinion on the weather around the globe for the last 6 months, which has been extraordinary. I'm talking in Russia. They had floods in different parts of the globe. Floods, blizzards. They've had snow in Cairo, Egypt, that they hadn't had in 150 years or something like that.
I heard that, but I didn't get a lot of details, but I picked up on that.
Well, that's my job. And all of it, all around the entire globe, it's going crazy. Now I'm going to give you a better one. I found out, and this is also in the DVD, I found out that about a year ago or more, maybe even 2 years at this point in time, the planets starting out where Pluto is and coming back in towards the sun are slowly heating up in our solar system. They are bouncing, wiggling, or jiggling in their orbits. The surface of all of the basic planets have had entire changes in their chemistry on the surface of all the major planets, et cetera, et cetera.
I wonder what would be affecting the basic geochemistry of a planet.
Because first off, the chemistry varies on all the planets. It's all different stuff. Some of it's gas, some of it's dust mixed with gas, some of it's hydrogen, some of it's sulfates, etc. But because of just the changes in heat and atmospheric pressure, movements, etc., like making a wave in the bathtub. You know, if you push your hand in the tub at the one end, it's going to end up hitting the other end of the bathtub, and that's what's taken place with Nibiru at this point, and all of its junk that's coming with it.
Brother Bob, I got to jump
Yes,
in
sir.
here real quick because we've got people in the chat room that's asking some questions, and we've got some other things that we want to touch base on before we get done the show. We're down to about 17 minutes. It's been just an incredible ride here, and we sign off. That's going to take us a couple minutes. So really, we got about 14 to 15 minutes
Give
left.
me a couple questions.
Okay, let's go ahead and do this. Brother John, thank you very much for joining us here tonight, and everybody tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Something to think about. with Brother John Glencoe right here on Interstellar Realities Radio. Once again, we're on with Bob Fletcher. That's BobFletcherInvestigations.com. And you need to go to that website and check out some of his research. I believe you will find it quite fascinating, to say the least. Just a couple things from our chat room. We always like to let people know that we're reading and we're here with them. Here's a question here, the top one. Any chance of a link for photos or video? And I'm assuming they're talking about some place they could see Planet X.
Well, first off, genuinely, in reality, any pictures of Planet X are questionable. I have some of them on my DVD. The bottom line, it is infrared. It's not. It has to be seen by infrared telescope of sorts at this time. Does not generate its own light. When it comes in closer, you will see it as a star in the sky as it grows bigger and larger as it comes in to go around the sun. But at this point in time, see, here's the problem, and it's also something that's a little difficult to put a handle on. Where is it? Okay, there's an argument as to whether it's 30 to 40 degrees off of our plane, what they call the plane of the ecliptic, which is where basically the planets are all on a reasonably flat plane, okay, give or take a few 100 million miles. All of our planets are pretty much on the same plane circling around, okay? If it is coming in on our plane, that's one thing. If it comes in, coming in close to our same plane that all the planets are on, that's one time schedule. If it's coming in from below or above on an angle of 30 degrees or so, which a lot of people think it is, then it will be a whole different story on the schedule of arrival. And the problem is, if it's behind the sun at any given point in time, it's like somebody says, where can we see it? Where can we see this thing? I have a great telescope. Well, you don't have one big enough unless you're the government. But number two, you don't know where to aim it. And the visual place where it may be at any given time would take an extraordinary amount of mathematical analysis. Once it starts coming in close enough to where it looks like a star and picking up the light from the sun itself or from other sources, then you will see it. Now, according to calculation, I'm going to tell you when it's estimated to be coming in. This is going to upset some people. By the way, let me give everybody, grab a pencil and a paper. I'm going to give you a separate address for those of you who are listening and may not have computers. If those of you who are not let's say computer-oriented, I'm going to give you an address where you can contact me, and I'll let you know how you can get a copy of the DVD. Now, it's been calculated related to all of the information put together, put into a computer, and kicking out the analysis of the most likely time for its return, the second least likely time, and then the third very least likely time to be passing back by. Now, this is going to upset some people. The possibility is very high, according to Gil Broussard and many other people, and the relationship to when it has been passing previously, is that it will be seen in December, and it will take several months for it to come close enough to go around the sun. But it will be seen in December of this year. And then we will have January, February, and then the key months for it to be closest to pass near the Earth and causing the most trouble would be March and April of next year. All right? Now, and then it will head back out, and whatever damage it's done will be finished, and we'll be licking our wounds. If it is not seen, and what I'm talking about seen is where it's up there and it looks like a new star up there in the sky, coming inward. It will be getting bigger every month, every week, a little bit bigger. It will look like a single star originally, even though there's probably a couple of moons going around with it and a lot of space junk. It'll be seen in December. It'll get bigger in January, February, and then March and April, make its journey around the sun and back out. The journey around the sun and back out is probably 155 days. Now, all of the best scriptures and information related to when it had passed before and was written in, logged in, and drawn, sketched out, and all the rest of that, it has always been, apparently, in March and April, like the Passover period of time. All right? So if, in fact, I would say if, in fact, we don't see it this December, and with it coming in, then we probably have a complete year to wait for it to come. If it still has not arrived in that second year from today, if it's still not on its way in, then we would be into 3 years of March. Okay, in other words, March or April, 3 years from now. But the consensus is that it's very likely to be seen this December and to pass in the March of April of next year. All right. Now, it's not my estimate. That's an estimate of other people that are I consider to be the experts. Now, here's something else that's very important. This is where the politics fits into this thing. The people that are keeping this secret from us, all right, a lot of people say, when will they tell us this is coming? They will never formally announce that this is coming in, all right? They are going to have, this is from the point of view of the bad guys, all right? The guys that have the tickets to go underground in the underground facilities and bring their families with them, all right? Those guys are going to have martial law declared in the United States a few months before 100,000 astronomers start seeing this thing appearing on the horizon, coming in as a new star. So, what are we talking about? If the timeline is being seen first in December and January, they will have to have some form of martial law a few months before that in the United States. So they will have complete control over the general public when it starts to become a riot on the surface of the earth. If the leaders of any of the major nations came out and told the world that this thing is going to be coming in 5 months or 2 months or 6 months, that this thing was going to be coming by, if in fact they did that, it would be the end of all things. The financing would be, the entire globe would go into riots. We think the people in ISIS are going nuts. Those guys over there with their raping and plundering of the Saudi Arabia or with the Arabian area over there. We think they're crazy. You would see that on the entire globe if they announced it was going to happen. So it's not going to be announced. They will never tell us. Now, the next question is, how would they get away with declaring martial law? Because they have to have the general public to go along with it. They can't just do this. They have to have the public believing that it's a good idea for martial law. All right? So it will be one of three things. It'll either be some major terroristic acts, like 9/11 type thing, chemical, biological, or something like that, across the country in several places. Pull that off, the American public will accept martial law. If they announce that it looks like Russia is going to have a direct confrontation of World War III for some reason or another, and or Red China, that will be good enough for martial law. And the third one of possibility is obviously an outbreak of an uncontrollable disease like Ebola or something like that, getting large enough that it would be a believable reason for martial law. One of those three is going to constitute, and again, the best sign for people to understand when this thing might be coming around is when you see that martial law genuinely starting to take place. So then that's going to be the only thing that the average American public is going to be able to understand. And again, it could be even the solar flares. The solar flares that they were talking about, the head of the CIA, James Woolsey, the solar flares that he and Janet Napolitano was talking about, those will, when they pass, when a solar flare is big enough and passes across the globe, it will burn every bit of electronics, starting with all of our satellites, and then burning every single generation power on the globe, whether it's the entire globe or just half of it. That relates to how big and how much of a flare hits. When that happens, stop and think about it, folks. Everything is black. It's done. There's no power, no fuel, no food, no transportation, no police communication. Nothing that depends on electronics will exist when one big solar flare does a trick on the globe. And again, all of these will be part and parcel to the passing of Nibiru whenever that takes place. And unfortunately, it looks like it may be within 3 years. And again, our sign that's going to be a realistic signature is going to be when they pull the need for martial law in America. That's all I've got for you. Now, if you got any more questions, we're about running off the clock here.
Yeah, we're just running off the clock, but I want to tell you, Brother Bob, it's been a real pleasure having you on the air with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Fletcher from BobFletcherInvestigations.com, and you can go over there right now.
Let me. Yes, you can do that. And those of you that don't have computers, got your pencil and paper. It's Bob Fletcher, Post Office Box 216, Bayview. That's Box 216, Bayview, Idaho 83803. That's Bayview, Idaho 83803, Box 216. Drop me a note. If you want the DVD, it's $24.95. We pay shipping, 4 hours, 2 discs. If you just want, drop me a note. I'll send you a copy of a catalog for those of you who don't have computers. I was surprised to find out the other day. I did a program, and I had forgotten about the folks that don't have computers, and I put out the address, and we had 100 letters. So whatever. It surprised me. There's a lot of people who still aren't plugged in out there.